You're not really going to get up for anything like you would get up for a 94,000 crowd at Wembley, defending a world heavyweight title, going el mono with another trained athlete who's trying to knock your brains out. That's not, nothing's ever going to really turn you on like that.
Chapter 3. Let's fight. Sometimes a person has to stand up and scrap for the thing they believe in, regardless of the noise going on around them. In the case of Fury versus Wilder 2, it was my moment to attack, literally, because after the first contest I knew a victory was in my power. Of course, everyone else in the world seemed to doubt me, again. They told me it was suicidal, again. I heard the bollocks comments, again. People said, if the Gypsy King stands and fights, he's getting dropped. But all of that rubbish only encouraged me to grip my guns even tighter. I'm not going to box Wilder, I reassured everyone. I'm just going to knock him out. What everyone seemed to forget was that last time around, I'd been in the process of shifting a load of weight, transforming myself from a fat mess into a world-class warrior. Since then, I'd grown in strength. But despite the ongoing metamorphosis, I couldn't be totally gung-ho in my approach. Wilder was a top-of-the-range knockout artist. Smacking people to the canvas was what he did best. While I'd put in the performance of a lifetime against him during our first meeting, he'd very nearly punched me out in round 12, and in doing so, I relearned a valuable lesson. When you're warring against someone that dangerous, your lights could be turned off at any second. To increase my chances of getting a win, I invited a new trainer to the Gypsy King camp. Sugar Hill Stewart was a bloke I'd first met in 2010, when he'd been working out of Kronk Gym in Detroit, which was owned by his late uncle, Emmanuel Manny Stewart, the man most famous for training Lennox Lewis, Thomas Hearns, and my old nemesis, Vladimir Klitschko. Manny would later invite me to join him at the Klitschko training camp in Austria that same year. I knew hammering Wilder would require me to build a serious knockout punch, and Sugar Hill was the man to create it, though there would be a little turbulence as we went along. Originally, I'd wanted him to work in tandem with Ben Davison, but Ben had other ideas. He wanted to be the main man, and in the end he walked away. It was a shame. Ben had known how to get the best out of me, but I respected his decision. I loved having Sugar Hill around, though. When he first arrived, the pair of us agreed that I should go back to basics. This might have seemed an awkward choice for a new partnership, especially seeing as I was an undefeated lineal heavyweight champion and no one was going to teach me how to fight. Surely I'd seen and done it all. But given my determination to smash Wilder, I was up for returning to some grassroots boxing, so that's what we did. Over a period of 6 or 7 weeks, we worked on my straight punch, the big right. Meanwhile, I was encouraged to focus on the way in which I connected my quick footwork to the hands. By relearning some old tricks, I received a serious upgrade. George Foreman once said that it could be very easy for an experienced fighter to get carried away in the heat of the moment. In my case, I'd focused too much on the idea of darting out of the way of my opponent's punches. The downside to that was that I rarely looked to knock someone out during a fight, though I'd still picked up 15 KOs, or technical KOs, by that stage in my career. Instead, when facing up to someone, I'd think, right, I'm going to hit him and then get out of the way quick. That had helped me to become the most elusive heavyweight in the game, the master of not getting caught. But it had also stopped me from doing the maximum amount of damage to the bloke in front of me. I wasn't always following up a good punch with a devastating one. As our work progressed, Sugar Hill asked me to concentrate on the way in which I landed my biggest hits over and over. The idea was to unbalance Wilder by making him sweat about what I was going to do, and to sharpen the technique, we worked on my style for firing out powerful single shots, 2 or 3 reps at a time. Everything was stripped back. Repetition was key, though we were very much up against it deadline-wise. Sugar Hill and I had started working together with around 6 weeks to go until fight night. It wasn't the longest amount of time to get everything locked down, but I reckoned it would be enough to do the job. We worked day after day, hit after hit. Before long, my fists had turned into fast-moving missiles. How I came to meet Sugar Hill and his uncle was a whole story in itself. As a fan of boxing, I knew all about Manny Stewart and what he'd done in the sport, so connecting with him was good times. We first worked together in 2010 when I received word that Manny wanted to train me. He told us, "If Tyson comes to Detroit, I'll make him a world champion in 3 years." At the time, I'd only just started, and Paris was pregnant with our first baby, Venezuela, so the idea of going to America was a non-starter. But a year later, once Venezuela was 3 or 4 months old, the thought of training with Manny began chewing away at me. I thought, if I don't go to America, I'm going to regret it, and all my life I'll be thinking, what if? I'd always said to myself, I never want to be an iffer, woulda, shoulda, coulda kind of person. I want to be a man who says, I know I did everything I could to be the best that I could be. So I decided to fly to the States. Getting to Manny was a mission, though. I had his number, but I couldn't get hold of him. I knew all about the famous Kronk Gym, which Manny ran, and that it was in Detroit, Michigan, but I didn't have an address. Like that was going to stop me. I went to a travel agent in Manchester, booked a ticket to America, and got on a plane with the belief that I could manage the finer details of where I was going and what I was doing once I'd landed. My instincts were spot on. I hailed a taxi at the airport and asked the driver if he knew where the Kronk Gym was. "Sure do," he said. "Get in." But once we arrived, what had once been Kronk Gym was nowhere to be seen. It had moved. I don't know whether I found the friendliest taxi driver in the world, or if they were all made that way in Detroit, but the guy called around, got a fix on the location of the new Kronk, and drove me all the way there. When I arrived, I walked in and dropped my bags as everyone stared. After a few nodded hellos, I wondered, so which one's my new trainer? It dawned on me that I didn't really know what Manny looked like. I'd heard all about him, but I hadn't seen that many photos. So I went up to the ring and asked for his whereabouts. The response was pretty moody. "No clue. And who are you?" "I'm Tyson Fury," I said, before explaining that I was the future world heavyweight champion, a comment that is now etched into boxing history. The bloke raised an eyebrow and called out to Sugar Hill, who was standing nearby. Within 30 minutes I was sitting in a restaurant around the corner from Kronk, where his uncle was having dinner. Apparently my timing had been immaculate, because Manny was only back for a few weeks, having been called into a training camp. "It's meant to be," he said. Damn right it was. For the next few weeks I stayed in Manny's house. He treated me like a member of his family. I felt very much at home. Originally my ticket back to Manchester had been booked for a week-long stay, but that was soon extended to a fortnight, and then a third week, because I was having the time of my life and learning so much. During the day I worked my arse off in Kronk, but at night Manny showed me around the Motor City scene as we visited restaurants and dive bars. At one point we ended up in a karaoke joint where everyone on the mic seemed to be a singer from the famous, now relocated, Detroit record label, Motown, or someone that had once dreamed of singing there. I couldn't help myself. I had to get up and let rip myself because, as you know, I didn't want to be an iffer, woulda, shoulda, coulda kind of person. I knew you were going to ask. Wonderful Tonight by Eric Clapton. I smashed it. When it comes to talking and confidence, you're up there with Muhammad Ali and Prince Nassim, said Manny afterwards. And when you've got confidence, anything is possible. Manny was in his late 50s at the time, and a Jack the lad. No doubt he was an OG and a lot of fun to be around. But he was also a person that commanded respect and a man of faith. One time we even went to a Catholic church together, which is just around the corner from his place. As a coach, he was fantastic. In fact, he was the first trainer that taught me how to fight as a big man. Up until that point, my main tactic was to get stuck in, my head down, arms swinging. But Manny encouraged me to avoid the punches coming my way, rather than simply withstanding them. "Don't do that," he said, having watched me pile into a sparring partner. "Stand up tall and box. Use your jab." Kronk was a great place to learn. I sparred with everybody in the gym. with partners rolling in and out of the ring. The place was packed with all weights and all sizes, and they all used to batter the crap out of one another. It was everything I expected from the place. The only downside was timing. Manny had to go work in another training camp, so I didn't have long with him in Detroit. But we would eventually reunite not long after in Austria, when he was training Klitschko. Manny's idea at the time was for me to move around with him, from country to country, so I could learn and improve, but I just couldn't do that. Paris and me had just had our second child, Prince John James. Rolling around Europe with Manny was a life for a single bloke with no commitments, so I was out. I would see him again, though. The most memorable time took place when I was about to fight Zach Page in 2010 on an undercard in Quebec, Canada. Manny showed up at the venue unannounced. He just rocked up on my doorstep, as I'd rocked up on his, only he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt, white trousers, and a pair of Gucci loafers, and he had nothing in the way of kit with him. Upon his entrance, the guy just looked around the room and said, "Who's got the pads? Who's got the gloves? And who's got the wraps? Give 'em here." And he warmed me up for what was a win on a unanimous decision in an 8-rounder. Manny was only 68 years old when he died, and it was a real loss. He was a great man who played a big part in my career, and although I didn't get to spend a lot of time with him, we forged a tight bond. That's because everything about our friendship was meant to be. If I hadn't got on that plane and if Manny hadn't been in Detroit, we'd have never worked together. And I wouldn't have hooked up with Sugar Hill and become a big-time heavyweight champion. It is true what they say about fortune favouring the brave, and my gamble in flying to America with nothing more than a phone number and an idea had paid off. In many ways, it was as if it had been written. As my work with Sugar Hill progressed, one of the things I noticed was that the time flew by too quickly. 1 minute it was Sunday, the next it was Sunday again. I felt as if my whole career had gone by like that. And on the eve of Fury vs. Wilder 2, it was as if nothing more than a few months had passed since my first ever ring walk in December 2008. I was only 20 years old back then, a lot more softly spoken, and with a lot more hair. But there was a confidence to burn. I was fighting the Hungarian Bela Yenyursi in Nottingham on the Carl Froch vs. Jean-Pascal undercard, and I showed up in a white robe, my hood pulled over my head. As I swaggered through the crowd and swooped into the ring, I felt battle ready. I'd arrived seemingly built for professional boxing. That was nothing compared to the entrance I made in Las Vegas for my second fight with Wilder. This was a top-end production with all the icing on the cake, and when planning the ring walk, I decided to match my Gypsy King status with a regal red robe, the type worn by a British monarch for their coronation. A crown was even perched upon my head. For any watching viewers still unsure of the message I was sending out to the world, a commentator from Fox TV filled in the blanks. He makes his way to the ring. The label, the Gypsy King, is not just a boxing nickname, it's ethnic pride. He's from a long line of Irish travellers, a very specific group of gypsies stretching across the UK and Ireland, and he has many Irish traveller cousins here, stateside. And the label, the Gypsy King, matters greatly among that nomadic group and within his bloodline. It is reserved for the toughest and best fighter among the Irish travellers. His grandfather was the Gypsy King. His uncle was the Gypsy King. And in this, the biggest ring walk of all that any heavyweight can take, he will not walk once he comes into the arena. The Gypsy King has decided upon a unique entry. The bloke wasn't kidding. As if anyone watching had any doubts about my status as a showman, I was then carried to the ring on a throne, my procession backed by a fitting soundtrack, the 1961 hit single Crazy by Patsy Cline. During the build-up to the fight, I'd wanted something that summed up my mental health struggles of the past few years. In the end, I went for a song that was probably considered by most people to be a gentle ballad. But to me, it was the perfect summary of my state of mind since 2015, especially given I was about to face the world's biggest puncher for the second time. The thing is, I didn't choose the song. The song chose me. When I'd first put the idea to my team in the training camp, Everyone had been unconvinced apart from George Lockhart. That would be gangster, he said, and he was right. Crazy was unlike any other walk-in soundtrack in boxing history, where the go-to cuts were usually hardcore rap or something heavy and aggressive. Nobody knew what the heck was going on, least of all Wilder. When the first bell went, he dropped a few good punches to the top of my skull, but I soon had his number, snapping his neck back with a succession of jabs. During the pre-match hype, I'd warned Wilder that he was getting knocked down in 2 rounds, but my promised delivery ended up arriving a little late. As the third drew to a close, I caught him with an overhand right to the side of the dome. It was a beauty. The blow seemed to pull the canvas out from underneath him, and Wilder fell like a puppet with its strings cut. There you go, I thought. Have that. For weeks, Wilder had been chatting about how I'd thrown soft punches in our first fight. Apparently they were like feather dusters, but on the night they didn't seem so soft and fluffy, and Wilder didn't appear so ballsy. My big right hand, a bomb constructed in the gym with Sugar Hill, had turned his legs to jelly and cracked his left eardrum. I wasn't done either. In the 5th, I sat him down again with a left hook to the body that almost knocked him out of his shoes. To anyone watching, it must have looked as if he'd been swung round by a crane. Fair play to him, though. He had the guts to keep on coming. "Okay, you want a bit more, do you?" I said, cracking his face and busting his ears again. Blood rained from the side of his jaw. Whenever we clashed, a fountain of red sprayed across my shoulders and splattered my back and face. I looked like something from a horror film, only I was the apex predator, and Wilder wasn't escaping me on the ropes. I jammed a series of pole drivers into his face, spinning him off balance. Then I worked his head until his eyes started rolling around like pool balls. Wilder was cooked, and his corner threw in the towel. I'd won on a technical knockout. As I raised my arms, he tried arguing with the official, but there was really no denying it. The Gypsy King had returned, victorious, and in doing so, I'd proved to everyone that I could still pack someone like Wilder off for his lunch. But winning a boxing match was only one part of the Hollywood-style ending. The other involved my impossible psychological comeback. I'd emerged from the dark, dark days to beat back depression, the hardest opponent I'd ever faced, and one that was far more dangerous than 10 Deontay Wilders put together. Later that night, as I celebrated in a club, a brave new world seemed to spiral around me. I felt great, but more than anything, I wanted to lie down for a good night's sleep. Then I planned on getting up the next morning and getting at it again. I was back. The undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, the top of the pros, with everything I'd ever wanted. Then, out of nowhere, the world turned to crap with the coronavirus outbreak in early 2020. Like everyone, I found the news unsettling, but from a career point of view, I was also feeling frustrated. I was in my fighting prime, ready to take on the planet again, but I was being forced to retreat into my house with the wife and kids. The good news was that everyone was in the same boat. I wasn't being stopped from fighting because of something I'd done. I was lucky, though. Everyone around me came through unscathed. We stayed healthy, and I was able to spend some quality time with the family. As the garden became a party with barbecues and bike rides and kickabouts with the children, I got to appreciate what was really important in life. I then made it my mission to train 3 times a day from home, even spicing things up by getting Paris to work out with me live on Instagram. For those of you that might be interested, you can check out my workouts in my book, The Furious Method. That was partly to keep my mental health in check. I wanted to stay busy. I needed to. With too much time to think, I'd learned that my mind could drift to some dark places, but exercise kept me occupied. I also knew that the boxing business would have to open up eventually, and when it did, the Gypsy King would be ready. Another Wilder rematch was on the cards. The worrying reality, apart from the obvious, we were in a pandemic, there was tragedy and heartbreak all over the world, was that everything that could go wrong with my future plans was set to go bloody wrong over the next year or so. The first issue involved the contractual dealings that always preceded a fight of this kind. An agreed date of 18th of July 2020 was pushed back until October, and then December, until the 24th of July 2021 was eventually fixed. Then, with 6 or 7 weeks of training camp under my belt, somebody brought COVID into the gym, and I ended up testing positive. Eventually, it was settled that I would face Wilder in a T-Mobile Arena in Vegas on the 9th of October 2021, 20 months after I'd last put him on his arse. The passing months felt like an age. Time had been cruel. In all, I'd lost nearly 5 years of my boxing career, 3 to my mental health, and then another 20 months to the pandemic. In the grand scheme of things, this was a nothing burger, especially when compared to the nightmare experienced by some people during that first grim year or two of COVID. However, from a boxing perspective, my statistics now seemed a little bit scary. 20 months was considered to be a long time between professional bouts, and the average boxer might have felt potentially exposed in those circumstances, especially when facing someone as handy as Wilder. But you should have learned something by this point in the book. I am not your average boxer. My attitude? Screw it. Let's fight. Somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, Wilder had started shooting his mouth off, dropping several excuses for how I'd come to beat him in Fury versus Wilder 2. All of them were rubbish. Some of them were embarrassing, and his reasons were very hard to take seriously. But for the record, I'll rattle them off, here and now. 1. A beauty. Wilder's ringwalk costume, a heavy gown, crown and face mask had been too heavy. By his account, it had knackered him out for the fight. 2. The ref was against him. 3. His water had been spiked. 4. Someone said I'd hit him with a gypsy curse before our first fight. 5. My gloves had been loaded with something the size and shape of an egg weight. This comment had originally been started by someone online, but he was happy to talk up the theory. According to him, the only trick I hadn't pulled was to let him win. Wilder was coming across as a sore loser, and as far as I was concerned, by complaining he had flushed his career knockouts and victories down the toilet, which was a shame. I'd always thought it was important to be a good sportsman, because that's what boxing was, a sport. Usually there could only be one winner and one runner-up, and it was important the two combatants conducted themselves in an orderly fashion, whether they'd emerged victorious or if things had gone south. For example, say I'd lost to Wilder on the night. Not that I would have. My reaction would have been to think, fair play to the other guy. He had a better game plan. He was a better man in the battle. Afterwards, I'd have told Wilder that I respected him. I'd have congratulated him on his success and acknowledged the hard work it must have taken to beat me. Then I would have echoed the same sentiment to any interviewer or journalist afterwards. I certainly wouldn't have gone around making a million excuses about spiked water and loaded gloves. These were small-time concerns, though. The aches and pains of living a career in battle. But then Wilder upped the stakes and crossed the line. Whereas the mood before our previous 2 fights had been friendly and sportsmanlike, something seemed to have changed in the build-up to Fury versus Wilder 3. It seemed to me that the bloke wanted vengeance rather than reclamation of the world heavyweight title, and out of nowhere he made a veiled threat to kill me. My mind is very violent, he said on social media. We built a whole facility to commit a legal homicide, and that's just what it is. My mind is very violent at this time. I can't wait. When you're contemplating and premeditating about harming a man and you see that person, what you've been thinking and feeling will come out. This wasn't the first time he'd sent out a brutal warning. Before fighting Dominic Breazeale in 2019, Wilder had claimed that he wanted to get a body on his record. Boxing is the only sport where you can kill a man and get paid for it at the same time, he said. I really couldn't understand where he was coming from. It all felt a bit daft. Before every contest, I'd always said a prayer that both boxers would come out in one piece. Then I'd wish the other bloke good luck and do my best to get the W. Wilder was saying online that he wanted to murder me. Okay, hands up. I did once tell Derek Chisora that I was going to kill him. In a heated press conference in 2011, I said, it will come down to one thing on the night. Who's got a bigger heart? Who wants it more? I know that I want it so badly nothing will stop me. I have a wife and 2 children to provide for. If it means killing you in a ring, that's what I'll do. To beat me, you'll have to kill me. You are an arrogant little prick. I'll smash your face in when we fight. For the record, I apologised for the comments as soon as I could, and at no point did I actually mean that I wanted to kill Chisora. It was a defiant middle finger in a press conference, a throwaway dig, in much the same way that if a mate or family member annoyed you or let you down, you might say that you wanted to kill them. I certainly wasn't threatening a person with legal homicide or premeditating a situation where I wanted to damage an opponent. While Wilder's comments didn't make me feel ecstatic, they weren't anything to stress about either. There was no way he was going to intimidate me or wind me up. Having said that, it made me wonder where he was in his life and why he wanted to murder someone in a sporting contest. I knew there was little point in turning an opponent into a hated enemy. Not when the chances of a potentially lethal incident happening were increased if one boxer was powered by anger or some other negative emotion. People have died in a ring. Plenty others have had their lives wrecked through serious injury. I didn't want that happening in one of my fights because somebody had become too emotional or was losing control. It was also an attitude I couldn't relate to. Boxing is fun. The title bouts I'd been involved in, or any type of boxing match for that matter, didn't represent a do-or-die situation for me. Whenever I'm in the ring, jabbing, dancing, or ducking punches, it feels like playtime, and I enjoy every minute of it. All of my fights have been like that. I love goofing around, and I never fight in a state of stress or tension. I certainly haven't gone into a bout with a panicked mentality. Instead, I float across the canvas, feeling relaxed and free. I live in the moment and never place any pressure on myself. That gives me a serious advantage over most fighters. I try to carry this mindset into all aspects of life. Everything is done off the cuff, even holidays. There are mornings where I've woken up and ordered everyone into the car. Right, pack up your stuff, I've shouted. We're going to Bournemouth. There have been other times when I've told Paris we were flying to Miami the next day. She knows how I'm wired and has usually been up for it. I suppose it is exciting. On the occasions when she hasn't fancied an adventure, I've travelled solo. There are even times when I was out in Manchester and felt the urge to travel abroad for a night. I usually took the next available flight, arrived at my destination around midnight, and then went out until 5 a.m. The next day I'd get a plane home at midday. I always had a cracking time. That's why Wilder's chatting didn't bother me. There wasn't anything to take seriously. I knew that once his words were done, I only had to get in there and outbox him for a third time. Every threat was either flying over my head or going in one ear and out the other. Besides, if I paid a blind bit of notice to what the other bloke was saying on the eve of every bout, how he was talking himself up, what he'd done and what he was capable of, I'd never have stepped up to Wilder in the first place. He was a powerhouse when I first met him in 2018. There was every chance he'd still be a powerhouse for our fight in 2021, but no chance was he getting through me.
No matter what life chucks at you, you just got to keep getting up and keep moving forward and keep setting goals and keep being positive. And even when you think you can't be positive anymore and every day is grey like it was for me and every day you want to die, just know that you're going to see sunshine days again and it will get better. That's the promise. With the right mindset, anything's possible, for sure. Anything that the individual wants in life, you can get. Anything's achievable. Being brutally honest, beating any of these people, it was what it was. It was just another fight. And beforehand, you really want to win. You want to do this, you want to do that. But when the victory's been in hand and you're the victor, it's not what you thought it might be, ever. Paradise syndrome was when I beat Klitschko. But I haven't allowed myself to experience it in recent times because I've got straight back to grassroots. From Vegas or Wembley, I've come straight back here doing the bins and back on the school run straight away. I don't ever let myself go to paradise anymore, ever. The lady asked me earlier, what do I look forward to? What excites me? The answer to that question is going for a run in the morning or going to the gym in the afternoon. So nothing really excites me that much. You're not really going to get up for anything like you would get up for a 94,000 crowd at Wembley, defending a world heavyweight title, going el mono with another trained athlete who's trying to knock your brains out. That's not, nothing's ever going to really turn you on like that. However, nothing has the risks of that either. So going to the gym and punching a bag or going for a jog down the road is less risky than your 90-odd thousand people at Wembley. So it's a double-ended sword again. With the risk comes a reward, but with the reward, there's a massive risk. So less risk, less reward. Emotionally, I was very, very distressed, distraught that I've got this child just been born and it's very, very ill.
Chapter 4. Family Guy. My daughter, Athena, was born prematurely at the beginning of August 2021 in the Royal Lancaster Infirmary, just 2 months before the third Deontay Wilder fight. The early arrival wasn't exactly a shock. Paris had predicted the baby would arrive ahead of time because our kids tended to show up that way. And at first everything went well with the birth. I held her, meeting my new daughter for the first time, and everything was perfect. There had been no signs of anything being wrong during their pregnancy. Then the midwife plucked her out of my arms. "I'm just going to dress her," she said, and within minutes everything was kicking off. Apparently her heart was beating too quickly, and at first I didn't think anything of it. Then everybody around us seemed to be panicking. Athena was hooked up to a machine, doctors were pushing buttons and taking readings, and her heart rate had rocketed to 300 beats per minute, when it should have been closer to 120 beats per minute, and there was nothing the nurses could do to fix the problem. They injected her with something that seemed to slow everything down, to around 140 beats per minute, but then she spiked all the way up again. The consequences were terrifying. If Athena's heart rate couldn't be steadied, she would probably die from a cardiac arrest. Watching the medical staff rushing around her and Paris was horrible, though I knew they were both in safe hands. After being born, R died and been resuscitated 3 times. The NHS had kept me going well enough. Still, that did little to ease the sense of total helplessness I was experiencing. I saw nurses sedating Athena. Someone was putting a tube down her throat to assist her breathing, and while everybody seemed to be acting calmly amid the chaos, there is nothing a parent can do in a situation like that, other than to watch and pray. I'd been reduced to nothing. My baby's life was hanging in the balance, and my name and what I did for a living wasn't going to change a thing. In the end, it was decided that Athena should be blue-lighted to the Alderhay Children's Hospital in Liverpool, and once there, her heart rate was stabilised. It was so hard to see her on an incubator, with several tubes and wires coming out of her body. She looked so tiny and vulnerable, and even though her situation had improved, the doctors were warning us we weren't yet out of the woods. Athena's heart rate was still all over the place, and at any given moment she might die. It wasn't as if we'd had one little scare and everything was suddenly okay. As Paris recovered and Athena started her battle, I bedded down in the Ronald McDonald House, an accommodation attached to the hospital. It was a place for parents to stay at while their kids were being cared for. Nothing could dissuade me. I was crashing there until Athena had stabilised, and no way were we being separated. But every day my head span. Though it was the last thing on my mind, at some point I was going to have to think about the upcoming fight with Deontay Wilder. If it was to go ahead, my preparation would have to happen at breakneck speed, because Sugar Hill hadn't even arrived in the UK. And while we mapped out a loose training schedule, the time left to prepare was a lot shorter than I'd have liked. Training camps usually lasted for 10 to 12 weeks. But for this one, I only had until the first week of October to train in Morecambe. After that, I was flying to the west coast of America, where I had 5 days to adjust to the jet lag. Like most fighters, I tend not to work in the week building up to a title bout. It's a way of preserving energy, in much the same way that a marathon runner doesn't do any serious running in the 7 days before a race. Not that I would be on Easy Street in Vegas. In those days before the fight, I was expected to attend promotional commitments and press conferences. So there was all that to sort out too. Once my schedule was pieced together, I estimated I had around 4 weeks to get into fighting form. It wasn't long, but I could still make it. At the Alderhay Hospital, the doctors were giving Athena life-saving treatment. The good news was that she'd been taken off the incubator and there were some signs of improvement. So whenever Paris and Athena were resting, I went to work. To tackle Wilder, I needed to make the most of every opportunity. And a day or so after the birth, I started a jog around the hospital with Dad. I wasn't in the best of shape at the time, because I'd been struggling to eat well, what with being in and out of Alderhay. I'd also not long recovered from COVID, and my lungs felt like 2 sheets of sandpaper whenever I put in a shift. Puffing a little, I'd probably only done around 3 miles when my phone started ringing. It was Paris. She was hysterical. "The baby's died," she screamed. "The baby's dead. She's dead. She's dead." I sprinted to the ward as fast as I could, fearing the worst. My chest burned. My legs were in agony, and as I ran, I tried my best to console Paris. "It's going to be all right," I panted down the phone. "Let the doctors do their job. Don't worry." When I made it to her bedside, there seemed to be 100 medics crowding around Athena. Apparently, she'd become completely unresponsive while Paris was holding her, and then her heartbeat had faded away to nothing. Athena was resuscitated, but Paris was now losing it. A nurse was trying to calm her as the specialist staff went to work. I couldn't believe what was happening. Questions were racing through my mind. Was my baby going to die? Was Paris going to be okay? If Athena survived, was she going to have this condition for the rest of her life? Eventually, to our enormous relief, and with the grace of God, the doctors were able to steady Athena. We were told she would have to remain in hospital until she had made a full recovery. In the end, it would take 3 weeks before she was allowed home, and for much of the time, I slept at the Ronald McDonald House, or on the floor of the hospital ward, feeling exhausted, praying for her to pull through safely, knowing that some parents never got to take their babies home. It hurt me to see her in the cot, attached to a bleeping machine. A lot of the time, Paris and me would sit there, staring at our baby. Keeping the worrying news from the kids was a tough job too. All of them were excited to meet their new sister, Venezuela, Prince John James, Prince Tyson Fury II, Valencia Amber, and Prince Adonis Amaziah. When it came to the boys, I thought, well, I'm the king, so I'll call them all Prince. It felt like a nice touch. The girls' names just came to us. We started with Venezuela and kept on going with the extravagant names, because once you've got a Valencia or a Venezuela, you can't call the next one Jane. It doesn't match. It doesn't match. No offence to anyone listening to this called Jane, by the way. It's a nice name. We also have some names from Greek mythology. So take Prince Adonis Amaziah. Prince is the son of a monarch. Adonis was a handsome Greek man and Aphrodite's mortal lover. As for Athena, Athena is a goddess of war and wisdom. We didn't want to tell them that Athena had nearly died because we didn't want to worry them. We've long believed that children should be allowed to behave like children for as long as possible. Frightening them at that stage didn't seem like the right thing to do. After what felt like an age, Athena had recovered enough for us to leave hospital at the end of August. Paris, our miracle child, and me. It felt like something special had happened, but I immediately went back to work, even though I probably could have postponed the fight. It's not as if I didn't have a good reason for requesting a delay. Sleeping rough on the floor of a hospital wasn't the best way to prepare for anything, let alone a world heavyweight title bout against a man who was talking up my murder. But there was no point mithering about it. I had to crack on. Turning up in Vegas, out of shape or mentally unprepared, would only give Wilder the opportunity to do some serious damage. Apparently he was working like a man possessed with his new trainer. And what was the point in looking for excuses? It wasn't his fault that my training plans had been ripped to shreds, or that I'd caught COVID in July, or that we'd come so close to losing Athena. Besides, pushing the fight back again would only add to the time between competitive bouts. Knowing that a positive mentality was everything in boxing, I decided to work with the cards I'd been dealt. It was now or never. And if anyone was thinking of underestimating me, well, more fool them. I thought, if this baby can get out of this hospital and get well again and beat death, then I can go over there and hammer some useless dosser, a man I've already fought twice before. I also had a new gym to work at, a space at Morecambe Football Club, which was only a couple of miles away from the house. I'd bought the place around the time of the first lockdown, installing a fitness room and boxing ring, and the investment was proving to be a massive game changer. Up until then, I'd moved from place to place, and at one point I was working out in Ricky Hassan's gym, which was a 70-mile drive away in Manchester. There was also an amateur gym nearby, but whenever I showed up to rock and roll, around 50 kids got about my feet, all of them wanting pictures and autographs. I found it difficult to do anything, let alone train. In the end, I took to using the local leisure centre. I'd show up, work the cross-trainer and pound the running machine before nattering to the old boys that were usually hanging about the place. I really couldn't have cared less about how the equipment looked, as long as it worked. I wasn't an influencer wanting to impress people. As long as I could do my workouts, that was all right by me. But suddenly, with my own gym, I had no issues and no distractions. October came around fast, too fast, and when I stepped on the scales I weighed 277 pounds, my heaviest fighting weight ever. I shrugged my shoulders and decided to get on with it. If I was man enough to take on the Wilder fight in the first place, then I was man enough to accept the consequences of it going wrong. I'd had a tough time for sure, but not as tough a time as Athena, and she'd shown the strength and willpower to fight her way back to life. I would turn her battle into fuel. I would use that experience as armour. When my moment came against Wilder, I'd know exactly what to do with it. Recently I went on a meet and greet tour, where I found myself answering all sorts of questions about my life, past, present and future. Who's been your toughest opponent? What was your greatest fight? What are you going to do in your retirement? At one event, a little boy came over. He looked up at me and said, "What's your biggest fear? What are you afraid of?" I crouched down to talk at his level. "That's a very advanced question for a kid," I said. "How old are you?" 11, said the boy. 11. Wow. The lad had stumped me. After thinking about it for a little while, I addressed the room and said, "The answer to that little boy's question is, I ain't afraid of nothing. But if there's one thing that worries me, it's failing as a parent." It is true. Raising a family is a massive responsibility, and much bigger than I'd ever imagined it could be. Athena's illness had been a reminder of that, but there have been plenty of others. And aside from the usual stresses and scares that come from caring for a family, Paris and I have experienced a number of miscarriages. They were incredibly painful. I've also learned that the world appears to be a more dangerous place when there are kids to care for. Watch the news if you don't believe me. Story after story about murderers, thieves, perverts and abusers. It has made me so much more protective. From the start I knew it was important to be focused and present when bringing up my kids the right way, because life has taught me that a person without a target is unlikely to achieve much. They're like a cruise ship without a final destination. They travel all over the shop, except to the one place they're supposed to arrive at. On the other hand, a captain with an intended harbour nearly always docks at the right point, no matter how far they have to travel or how dangerous the seas. Raising the Fury kids the right way is my destination point, as is finishing my career undefeated. But that's because I've always been excited about having a family of my own. When I met Paris, one of the first things I asked her was how many kids she wanted. She was 15 at the time. I was just 16 and an amateur boxer on the up and up. But Paris looked at me and came up with an impressive number. 10. Nearly a whole football team. You'll do for me, I thought. Let's go. I'm not sure we'd be together now had she told me that raising a family wasn't in her plans, because it's what I've always wanted in life, along with being a boxing champion. But let me tell you, the success would feel pointless if I didn't have Paris and my 6 children, and growing older will be so much more fulfilling as a result of being with them. When a rich person hits their 60s or 70s, It's irrelevant how many Bentleys they have in their garage, or how many hot people they banged in their 20s and 30s, not if they're sitting at home, alone. Life can be rough as you grow older. If a person has placed the pursuit of money and career before family and love, they'll be in for a shock as the years roll by. I understood that from the beginning, because becoming a husband and a father changed my life. Before Paris and our first kid, Venezuela, everything was about my boxing career. Having got married, my focus then shifted to providing for the two of us. But as soon as Venezuela arrived, everything changed again. I was 21 years old and making my way up the pro ranks, but providing for her was my main drive. Rather than thinking about what was the best move for me or my career, I looked to what was best for the baby. Nothing else mattered. I would have happily gone without food or walked without shoes to be the best parent I could possibly be. That love has been the same for all our kids. It hasn't dimmed one bit. I love hanging out with them. Sometimes, such as during the school holidays, I feel like I've been taken hostage, but for the most part it's a great laugh. I've even had a special bed made up so the whole family can squeeze in together to watch movies. Some of them are getting a little bit bigger now, and I'm becoming an encouraging parent. I want them to play sports. Prince John James is trying out basketball, but he's massive for his age and he's going to be pretty heavy by the looks of it. I have no idea how good he's going to be at shooting hoops. Then again, Shaquille O'Neal was 300 pounds, so there's a chance. Weirdly, or maybe not, the one sport I'd be really happy for all the kids to take up would be boxing. I only say weirdly because a lot of parents worry about the physical impact of being a serious fighter. But I've learned that boxing teaches discipline and respect, which are good values to instill in a child from an early age. If you haven't been to a boxing gym, you should pop into one for a look sometime, because you'll find that most kids are polite and mindful of their manners. It's because they understand what it feels to take a hit to the face. Overall, though, I'll encourage all of my kids to follow their dreams, because that has been my life. The biggest regret most people have on their deathbed isn't the things they did, but the things that they didn't do. In fact, this subject is the only thing that Vladimir Klitschko and myself have ever agreed on. Sort of. He said, failure is not an option. I say, losing isn't failure. Failure is not having the guts to go for something in the first place. A child is like a sponge. They only know what they're shown. That means they'll be interested in the path you take them on. If you're a Manchester United fan, there's a chance your kid will follow. The same applies if you're into music, art, films, or martial arts. So far, I've encouraged all my boys to box. Prince Tyson, Prince John James, and Adonis all love it. My 4-year-old daughter, Valencia, likes the training and punching too. The only one who isn't keen is Venezuela, and that's because she's a lot older and is more interested in makeup and going out with her friends. How I'll feel later on in life if one of the kids turns pro and faces up to a giant in the ring, I don't know. As I've said, my mum couldn't watch me fight when I turned professional. My dad has also found it stressful at times, and he's been a boxer. I suppose as a parent, it's not the greatest, seeing your child getting lumped while everyone sitting nearby yells and screams for blood. Even though I'm biased when it comes to boxing, being a pushy dad really isn't my thing. I'm not going to force anyone into doing something they don't want to do, because when the going gets tough, the kid will just pull out of whatever it is they're doing, especially if it hurts, like boxing. My tactics are to mind my own business, while encouraging every one of them to find an activity they're passionate about, and to surround themselves with good people. Rather than forcing something upon anyone, I'll try to inspire all the kids through doing, by running and training every day and grafting my arse off. If they can learn from my work ethic, where I'm up early in the morning, seizing the day, and maintaining that same energy through to bedtime, they'll be okay. The one thing I will be pushing when it comes to my kids is the truth about how to value the real things in life. There's so much nonsense out there about the importance of being famous or becoming a multimillionaire, especially on social media platforms, that it's all gone a bit mad. But the one thing I've learned in life is the importance of not taking what I've got for granted, like my family and friends, and my health. I even place a huge amount of value on the tiny things, like being able to wake up in a house with running water and gulping in some fresh air on my morning run, or having the freedom to buy food from the local supermarket. I nearly had all of those things ripped away from me during my breakdown. Truly, it's only once everything in life has looked like it's going to fall apart, or you lose something incredibly important, like a family member, that you'll really appreciate its true value. Once it's gone, it's gone. And like a shattered mirror, you can't glue it back together and expect it to look the same. When it comes to teaching my kids what's what, I want them to have good people in their corner like I do whenever I step into the ring. I've been lucky to have the likes of Sugar Hill, Ricky Hatton and my uncles alongside me as I've progressed as a fighter. But the reality is that if you're working with 6 losers, you're about to be one. The same applies to kids when they study at school. My children will also have to learn how to stand on their own 2 feet because there's nothing worse than a person who can't earn their way. That's the upbringing I came from. That's the upbringing I'll be given to my family, because becoming independent is a wonderful thing in life. Paris and myself come from a gypsy background, where there are traditions and long-held values. These customs have made it difficult when balancing the type of family life we'd grown used to as kids with the challenges of modern society. For example, Catholicism is our religion, and faith is very important to me. There's also no sex before marriage. But living in the Western world has made that a hard fight to win. At the same time, people in the traveller community work very hard to keep their relationships together, and divorce rates are low as a result. My advice to our children will be to make sure they're married, or at the very least in a stable relationship with someone, before having a family. While I was growing up, I noticed that the people around me were generally wedding at a young age and starting their families shortly afterwards. Because couples often met within their local communities, there was a very good chance they'd have learned a lot about one another before even getting together, which lengthened the odds of them having a nasty surprise or two later down the line. By the time they were 30, a couple might have been married for as long as 10 years. My mates outside of the traveller community experienced something very different. Having not settled young, they'll meet someone new and for the first 5 minutes they're excited. They're the one. When I'll then check in with them a few weeks later, it's over. They're a crazy person. But that's because we're talking about 2 people in their 30s, with their own lives and their own ways of getting on. Having gone through the first few months, they might have realised there was very little in the way of shared common ground, and they've broken up. I'm not saying this is always the case, just sometimes. But in gypsy courtships, we tend to have the same interests, traditions, and beliefs. We grow up together and get married young, and 9 times out of 10 will stay strong. This has worked for generations. If it ain't broke, I see no reason to fix it. In many ways, traditions like these made me a man before my time, but everything was geared towards growing up fast in our community. While most kids my age were in school, messing around with their mates, I was already working, earning a living and paying my way. Later, when those same kids were having a great time at college or university, or travelling around Europe, I had responsibilities. I was 21 when our first daughter was born, and all of a sudden I had bills to pay and mouths to feed. It definitely felt like a steep learning curve, but I was up to it. Paris came into my life when I was on the rise in boxing, representing both England and Great Britain at an amateur level. I think I'd had around 2 or 3 fights at the time. Since then, we've grown up together, from kids to adults, through thick and thin, and it has ended up being a fairy story. It's also been tough in places. I'm sure it wasn't easy for Paris, being married to a 20-something Jack the Lad, one who thought he was good-looking and was fast turning into a boxing champion. That attention would have been tricky for her from day one, because once we'd got married, I turned pro almost immediately. I was boxing on the telly. I was in the papers. Magazines and radio shows wanted to interview me all the time. So in a way, Paris has been married to someone in the public eye all her life, though if she hadn't wanted that lifestyle, she could have chosen someone else. Someone more normal, because I was anything but. Abnormal is more my thing. It helps that Paris isn't that interested in fame. She never has been, and she never will, because like me, she hasn't changed since the day we first met. She's still the same OG. Of course, loads of people have offered her a job on TV, either in a full-time role or through an occasional appearance, but she hasn't been that interested in a lot of them, mainly because we've got a family that she wants to spend time with, and Paris is happy with what she does. She's strong too, which is great for me because behind every good man is a better, more robust woman. There's no doubt she's propped me up from time to time, especially when my mental health collapsed. Her support and understanding has been everything. That's been most obvious whenever I've had to ready myself for a fight. Around 10 to 12 weeks beforehand, I'll lock myself away from the family in a training camp, which is a lonely place for me to be in because I'm a people person. I don't like being on my own. I need interaction all the time. In fact, the only time I'm by myself is when I go to bed in those months before a fight. I don't do meditation. I don't need an hour a day of my own space. And when I'm on a long car journey, I'll immediately call someone up for company. Working away from the Furies is no fun for me. But it's important to have zero distractions, and a family as big as mine brings plenty of them. Paris has always understood that these periods of separation have to take place, and she's okay with the time apart. Really, it has always been that way for us. We don't know any different, and that same rule applied even when training for the third Deontay Wilder fight, after Athena's troubled birth. Once our new daughter was in the clear, and Paris had recovered, I only had a month to get ready, and though the camp was based at my own gym in Morecambe, I still stayed away from home for the most part. I went home at weekends to see everyone. As hard as it was to be away from my family in the circumstances, training had to be my new priority. I had to block out whatever was going on in the outside world. That's because when it came to fighting Wilder, I needed to think strong to stay safe. The bloke was a big hitter, and I hadn't prepared as much as I would have liked. Not that it was stressing me out. As far as I was concerned, I was winning. The other bloke wasn't, and my mind was prepared enough. It's just that I wasn't there for the good of anyone else. I was doing a job before heading home to the family, fit and healthy. My happy place.
Paris was pregnant and it was due to go in. We went into hospital down here in Lancaster and she was in for 2 days, usual labour job. And she had the baby at, say, 4 or 5 in the morning. And I had the baby in my arms, everything was perfect. There was no detection of problem in pregnancy. And then the midwife took the baby off me and said, oh, just dress from whatever else. And then she said, oh, she's got a problem, her heart's beating real quick. So I didn't think anything of it. I thought, she'd be all right, like. So then they took the baby and they started panicking, pressing buttons, and loads of doctors come running in and stuff. And they hooked her up to machines and she was beating at 300 beats a minute and it should be 140. So they said, right, we need to stop this baby's heart from thinking. So they rushed her into intensive care unit and they injected her with this stuff that slowed the heart down. It come back down to, say, 138, 145, thank God for that. And then all of a sudden, 2 minutes later, bang, back to 300 again. So they'd done that 3 times. And they was on the phone to the hospital in Liverpool, the Alder A Hospital, taking advice from their specialist doctors. And they'd done what they could to her. And they said, no, she has to be transported to this special unit over there in Liverpool. So the ambulance came, took her away, and just a big trauma, you know what I mean? And we drove down there flying and didn't know what was happening with the newborn child. And emotionally, I was very, very distraught that I've got this child just been born and it's very, very ill. So we went down there to Liverpool and they did a ton of stuff with her and the heart it kept continuing at 300 and this, that and the other. And it was she had a heart condition called CVT, which is heart beats real quick. And newborns and older people can get it as well. But the newborns grow out of it quite quickly. But she was in the intensive care unit and I went out running and she seemed to be stable for a day or so. And I get a phone call from Paris, absolutely ridiculously, off a trolley, screaming and shouting, saying the baby's dead. So I was 3 miles out running. So I'm trying to run back and you can imagine the stress I'm going through on the way back. I'm trying to calm her down, saying let the doctors do it. I've ran back. So I went in and trying to calm her down and the doctors was all around the baby. They got her pulse back and got her back going again and it was just a hard time. You know, I was sleeping. I was out there and up in the hospital there full time for over like 10 days or something, 2 weeks, however long it was. Don't quote me on that because I can't remember exactly how many days it was. I was just eating shit and didn't care about anything else.
Hospital food.
Yeah. Just obviously want the baby to come out and be all right and all that.
Yeah.
And as soon as the baby got well enough, said, right, she can leave on Tuesday, I left the hospital, went straight into training camp for Wilder 3, which left me around about 4 weeks and 5 days, just under 5 weeks training. And I had to cross the Atlantic and go to the west coast of America, which is an 8 hours time difference.
Yeah.
It takes a week to recover for a sportsman. So I took it down to 3.5 weeks. So I did 3 weeks in England, a week over there and done, straight in. So very, very, very ill prepared for the fight.
Could you have postponed?
I could have done, but I'd already had just under 2 years out the ring due to COVID, 22 months out. So I thought, well, you know what, fuck it. I'm not postponing again. It's going to be 3 years in a minute. This is it. It's either do or die now. And I went over there with the attitude that if this baby can get out of this hospital and get back well again and recover from death, then I can go over there and beat a man I've already beaten twice before. And Wilder had a good camp and he came out firing on all cylinders. It was definitely worthy of any trilogy in the history of boxing for sure.
Yeah.
It was an up and down roller coaster battle of two champions of the sport at the best, at the peak.